Welcome to episode 9, Litigating Literacy, powered by Lifeline to Literacy. A couple terms that are used, evidence-based and research-based, when it comes to different reading programs that are out there. Can you help me understand the difference between those two?
Well, evidence-based is going to be the highest level of evidence or research behind a program. Evidence-based, generally, you're looking for like randomized controlled trials that are more of a medical model. So we're actually having a control group. We're having, we are testing the program in specific conditions and then looking at the outcomes for those children over a course of time. So randomized controlled trials are kind of the highest caliber of evidence to say whether a program is or isn't effective. Research-based is someone did some research on it, and that can span a pretty wide spectrum of things. So for instance, if I have a curriculum that I am trying to put out and I'm trying to sell to a school, I can do research on my own program. And I can say it was used in this classroom, in this school, and these kids made 10% growth over the course of the year. And I can call that research-based. So I can do my own research on a classroom and say there's some growth and call it research-based. Doesn't mean it's research-based for its effectiveness. It doesn't mean it's independently research-based. Surely doesn't mean it's peer-reviewed research-based. It just means some research was done on it. And so schools are really big on calling things research-based when the only one researching it is the person selling it to them.
Are most of the programs research-based that the school use? And is there any requirement to have the evidence base?
So every program that schools are using, they will tell you is research-based, okay? But then you start asking to see the research. Doesn't always actually exist. Or then potentially one of my favorites is they say, well, it's based on research-based methods. And what does that mean? Well, I mean, there's some research out there that direct instruction is effective. Well, this uses direct instruction. There's some research that multisensory instruction is beneficial for kids. And they'll say, well, this is multisensory. We like tap our fingers or we use a sand tray, we skywrite, and they'll call it multisensory. And, so there's research that certain techniques are effective. And if the program incorporates a technique, they will call it a research-based program.
Is it safe to say some programs are better than others? Or is there, obviously there's a spectrum of programs. So I'm assuming some are better than others, but how are those judged to be better? How is it compared?
The only thing we should be judging programs on is, do they work to teach kids to read? Do kids come out literate at a higher rate with this program than that one? And probably more importantly, are 95% of the kids coming out literate based on the program? Because we know that 95% of the kids can read at or extremely close to their grade level with effective programming. So any program you put in a classroom, if 40% of those kids are not coming out as proficient readers, your program's probably not effective. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it research-based, evidence-based, and maybe it's not the program's fault. Maybe it's the implementation. Maybe it's the teacher's training, etc. But we should be looking for effectiveness of, are we teaching kids to read? Not, was there some research that one class in one part of, Maine tried it out and they did better than the class with the really bad curriculum?
Whose responsibility is it to choose curriculum?
I mean, schools have different labels for that person. I mean, some of them literally have like a curriculum coordinator or, another individual. It's generally administrative. Teachers don't necessarily get to pick what's used in their classroom. The school chooses a curriculum, sometimes on like a 6-year cycle. So, This year we may be choosing new reading and science, and next year we may be choosing new math and social studies. So, like, they'll cycle through, and once you pick a curriculum, you're usually stuck with it for a 4 or 6 year cycle. I, I don't know if that totally answers your question, but usually administration is picking these.
Okay. So I guess my first thought is they're picking a curriculum that teachers had not been trained on. How do teachers get trained on that particular curriculum effectively? It seems like that might be a choke point because we have a lot of comments that we've received already are from teachers saying, "Mm, we understand where you're coming from. We don't pick this curriculum, and then we have to teach it. Where's is it sounds like there's a disconnect there. Is that accurate?
I think the disconnect comes earlier in that cycle. The real question is, what training do the people choosing the curriculum have in understanding what is an effective curriculum, and what are they basing their choices on? Because some of what I have seen is they're not basing their choices on actual evidence-based things. They're not looking at peer-reviewed studies. They, like many consumers in all fields, like the shiny object. And so they are making decisions based upon the best marketing, the most responsive sales rep, the what are the other school districts in the area doing? What are the perks? I mean, some of these things come with perks. Like Lucy Calkins, my least favorite curriculum ever, most of her training was in New York City. That's a perk. You get to go and be trained in her program in New York City and, taking a show, taking a whatever, and then you get to come back and then train the other poor teachers who have to use the Lucy Calkins in the classroom, on how to use it. So the big question is, what qualifications do the people choosing the curriculum have before they make the choice, and what are they basing that on?
It, obviously, you're not an expert, with regard to research based or that curriculum, but what maybe are some best practices or what should a school district do with regard to choosing our curriculum?
You have to look at the research, okay? Like, I had, someone ask a parent, "Well, how do you know?" You wouldn't know whether or not this was peer reviewed, would you? And the response was, "I feel that I'm really capable of reading studies."
Mhm.
The people who apparently are not very capable of reading studies are the people in charge of picking the curriculum. Because what is happening is some programs have only ever studied themselves. They study themselves and they say, "You know what? We work." Is that really like, what other area do we say, if you want to sell me something, you should look to see if what you want to sell me works? And then pitch to me how great you think it works, and then you'll buy it.
I'm thinking of I'm not going to name the drug or the company, but there was a highly, uh, I guess, famous case where that was done. They did their own internal research saying how effective this was, yet it killed thousands upon thousands of individuals. And that's kind of what I'm hearing here. Why would any school district not immediately eliminate a research based program versus an evidence based program?
So, in fairness, evidence base is a pretty high standard, and generally someone has to fund that research. So, if I don't want Lucy Calkins studying Lucy Calkins to say that Lucy Calkins is effective, somebody has to be willing to invest the money into studying Lucy Calkins compared to something else, and then make some decisions. So, there's not a lot of individuals willing to invest in the research, which is extremely beneficial then for all of these curriculum companies, because they know nobody's going to come in and research them for the most part. So as long as they put out their own research. And I mean, the other piece is you'll get this criticism that, well, we can't use students as research subjects. Like, that wouldn't be fair. But let's just be honest. Half the schools in the country are already the control group with crap curriculum, Lucy Calkins, Fonteness and Pinnell, balanced literacy. We already have a controlled group that we know is not learning to read. So why don't we look at what's working in the classrooms that are learning to read and decide how much of that is curriculum, how much of that is teacher training, how much of that is the actual, how she's taking that curriculum and providing it to the students. Because all of those things matter. You can have a research-based curriculum that the teacher doesn't use as designed and that destroys the research base.
Have some states or school districts ban different curriculum?
Yes. I mean, it's kind of a sad state of affairs when we have legislatures who arguably know less than some of the educators having to step in and say, you can't keep wasting our taxpayer money on that. But yes, many states have now laws saying, stop wasting our money on balanced literacy, on 3Qing programs, on certain curriculums. Um, but I mean, here's what I'll tell you honestly, some of these states then make a list of approved curriculum. It's politics who gets on the approved curriculum list. And so we're back at who's the best salesman, who's the best pitch, who can fill out the government paperwork in a timely way um, to
Who
sell
can
their
lobby?
curriculum, who can lobby. So I don't know that it's a solution to be banning curricula. Well, we should all ban 3Qing. Let me state that we should all be banning 3Qing balanced literacy as core curriculum.
Just because I don't know. What is 3QE?
It's a methodology of teaching reading that really at its heart, and it's going to piss some people off because some people are like, oh, 3Qing is still essential. It's based on guessing. It's looking at, does it look right? Does it sound right? Does it make sense? So you look at the word and you try and figure out based on the first letter. You try and you look at the word in one of these picture books. You're looking at the letter CAT. Not certain what they say, but there's a cute cat on the page. But you may say kitten, so it's cueing based on the pictures. And then when you read what you think the words are, then the last cue is, well, did that make sense? So you're trying to figure out, okay, the words that I thought these were, when I read them together, do they make sense? That's not how we learn to read. We don't second guess. We don't make stuff up based on pictures and other cues and then decide, did what we make up seem like it would make sense?
Okay.
That's 3Qing.
Okay. Okay. So, how much input? We get a lot of comments from teachers that seem to either have no voice or their voice is muted because they fear for their jobs and they cannot go to administrations and say, look, this is not working. Here's what we should be doing. How much input do teachers actually have? Because we've taken some heat as anti-teachers, which we're not. We want the best teachers. We want to pay for the best teachers. We want the best results. I'm results oriented. So, how much input are teachers getting here?
I mean, I don't work in schools, so I can't say that piece. But what I can say based on, you know, like when our district did the pilot study and conversations I've had with teachers and other things, they may be asked for their input, but like a lot of things, again, in government, because schools are government schools, who knows if that's being taken into account at all? Because teachers may come in and say, we want a really strong program that has, the phonemic awareness, the phonics, all of these different things. But ultimately, if a crap curriculum gets chosen, that's what they get in their classroom. So once the decision is made, not only is it made, but it's often made for the next 4 to 6 years of the curriculum cycle. So, teachers may be able to give an opinion, but a lot of these teachers don't have the training they need to also have an informed opinion. How many teachers are reading the research behind the programs that they think are best versus what they like teaching?
So if I'm a teacher, I get a curriculum, whatever it may be. All right. And then I'm going to implement it. What if I took that curriculum and modified it? Is and said, you know what? I've read some research and it says that I need more phonemic awareness. I'm giving a very basic example. And I modified that curriculum. Is that helpful? Is it hurtful? What effect does that have?
Realistically, it's not that if you modify it, every teacher has to modify whatever curriculum comes in the classroom because a lot of these things, like there's a program, I think it's called Wonders. All right. If you were to teach Wonders as designed for like, the first grade curriculum, it would probably take 2 to 3 hours of your day to get through the reading, to make it through the steps, to make it to the end of the book. So what has happened with the science of reading is now publishers are shoving so much into their curriculum, and teacher can't possibly teach it all in the block. So we're forcing teachers to take programs and modify them to fit into their schedule. And what happens is teachers pick, I mean, look, they pick things they think are important. I'm not discounting that, but they also pick the things they like and the things they think are going to be most engaging and the things they think kids like.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that they're picking the things that are hard, that kids need to learn whether they like them or not. So even when we bring in a good curriculum, we bring in curriculum that's just not conducive to fit into the reading block in such a way that a teacher can follow it.
So I've heard you use a term before, fidelity. Um, can you explain that term and how that relates to the curriculum and the implementation?
I think fidelity becomes most important when we move into an intervention setting. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, yes, there's fidelity in general education curriculum, but let's move into the intervention room. So now we have a kid we know is a struggling reader. All right. There is a very specific science behind how children learn to read. It's not a mystery. It's not, we're still trying to figure it out. We know how kids move from speech through print and each of the steps that they need to master before they can move on. A good evidence-based program is going to walk the child through those steps, and they're going to require mastery. They're going to have assessments. They're going to have a scope and sequence. Each one of them is going to have certain skills that the child has to be introduced to, learn to try and do, and master before you move on to the next one. And then occasionally you're looping back to make sure that those foundations stay solid. That's when fidelity becomes important. So if we're going to choose an intervention-based program that has a scope and sequence, we need to use it as designed, or all of that research means nothing. Because if I decide to pull out an element, or I decide to shorten it, or I decide to do it less often, I'm not relying upon the research anymore. I've designed my own program with new elements, new modifications that now has no research behind it.
Does that happen?
Every day, all the time. I mean, I heard there's an individual, Dr. Tim Conway, who is a reading research neuroscientist, and he and I had a discussion about this at one point in time, and he described it as similar to prescribing penicillin. Okay. So you have strep throat. There's a readily available cure of a certain kind of penicillin. All right. Penicillin has compounds and components in it. It needs to be mixed a certain way. And then when you get that, your pharmacist says you need to take this twice a day for 7 days, whatever. There's a specific. So we know how to cure strep throat if we use these compounds in the right way, et cetera. But what we're doing in our classrooms is we're taking the components of reading and we're tossing them at teachers, and we're allowing them to mix the drug however they want and then decide how often to administer it, who to administer it to, and how many days to administer it. And we're expecting the cure. And that's just not possible. They cannot change the components, change the mixture, change the dosage, change the number of times they get it, and expect it to work. But that's what we're doing every day in our intervention classrooms.
So, and that's specific to not research based, but specific to evidence based.
Yes.
Okay. It has to be done a certain way.
Well, it it has to be done a certain way if you want the results the evidence showed it could make. So if you use a program that the evidence says if you use this program this way, 95% of your kids are going to become readers. If you want the 95% result, you use it the way it was researched. If you want to get a different result, start pulling pieces out, start discarding stuff, start, switching the order, start doing different things. You can't expect the outcome that the research says if you use it this way.
Boy, that's frustrating because it seems to me that it is very evident what we can do, but somewhere along the lines we're deciding not to do that. And is it really a time is it a time issue, do you think, with the teachers? I recall a lot of comments. We just don't have that time. We just don't have that training. Is it time? Is it training? Is it a multitude of things where we're falling down? When we pick the right instruction.
So I do think it's a multitude of things. And let's keep in mind that each child is different and there may be co-occurring things. You may have ADHD, you may have autism, you may have other things that a teacher has to work with. And she may have 4 or 5 of them, each with their own set of things
Right.
in here. And they're not going to move at the same pace and they're not going to grasp the skills at the same time. But she has to keep moving and she has to keep progressing through the program. So I think one of the biggest breakdowns is who who do we wait for it to master before we move on? And for the kids that don't master the skill, what happens to them? Because somebody's catching on and some kids aren't when you have a group. And the kids that don't catch on, there's this belief that I'll go back and I'll catch them up. I'll reteach them that skill or whatever. But they're still moving on. So there is so many pieces. And there are kids like, I'm not saying you can't pull in another resource and say, all right, he's really having a hard time with the short A sound, and I've used all the samples in here, so I'm going to pull in another short A sound. Okay. I'm not saying you can't pull in something to reinforce a skill. The problem is when you start pulling out things and say, I'm not going to use this piece. I'm not going to use that piece. I don't have time for that one. This kid doesn't have a goal. I mean, one of the problems we had with our own kids was when they were using Wilson, he didn't have a comprehension goal. Wilson has 3 blocks, a reading block, an encoding block, and a comprehension block. They just removed the comprehension block because there wasn't a matching goal. So there's all sorts of reasons that teachers, particularly in our intervention classrooms, fail to use the programs as designed.
So if I'm a teacher and I really want to understand the science, would you recommend a couple books or a couple doctors that have it right?
It depends on what you're trying to do. So there
Just to
is,
understand the research behind it and the science of reading.
I
Just
think,
the baseline.
I think probably one of the more well-known and effective, like teacher training. We're not giving you a program. We're not training you in a program. We're training you in the things your college should have taught you in the science of reading.
Okay.
There is a program called LEPERS that is by Dr. Louisa Moats and a variety of other brilliant professionals. That is an excellent teacher training. There's the 95% group, named because we know we can teach 95% of kids to read if we do it right. So, I mean, there are some really good teacher training that will get you the background knowledge. Then there's different training for each of the types of intervention. I mean, I think that one of the highest level trainings that teachers can probably get is what's called CALTS, the Certified Academic Language Therapists. Those are individuals going through Take Flight, which is a 3-year intensive program.
Wow.
Okay. And then they come out on the other side as certified academic language therapists, which is one of the higher levels of training. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the perfect program or that's the best intervention,
Yeah.
but that's one of the higher levels of training. A lot of the others, I mean, you can do some of these Orton Gillingham programs And it's a 6-hour training. And now you're at Gillingham certified. So, you know,
I don't know that I would feel comfortable with 6 hours, and that's just me. I
yeah.
think it's much more complex than that, but
So I mean, there are some really good trainings out there. But teachers either have to use their money to get the training or their time. You know, letters is pretty intensive. It's equivalent to a college course. So now we're asking teachers to take a college course because they didn't get the training while they were in college. So they have to invest the time and the money in it. And some teachers, they can't.
I'm sorry, this is going to be an ignorant question. Are all teachers taught how to teach reading?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
You're saying if I go into university and I go into education, when I come out with a degree, I will not understand how to teach kids how to read?
The vast majority of universities in this country are still teaching the balanced literacy and the 3 Qing. If you're asking, are teachers getting courses in literacy and reading? Yes.
That's what
Okay.
okay.
Teachers
My
are getting
apologies.
courses in literacy and reading. They're not getting effective courses about how a child learns to read and, the steps that they need. And it I mean, one of the things that I learned through the trainers in the Dow Foundations program, in order for one of those teachers to teach the program, they must first pass the program. So they have to
That's
go
reasonable.
through the Linda Bell auditory conceptualization screener and show that they're capable of hearing the sounds, processing the sounds, and making the sounds. Like, they get screened to make sure they have the capability of differentiating all the sounds and hearing them and speaking them before they start teaching kids how to do those things. And before they start working on, a specific blending or segmenting or the different chains, they must first show their proficiency in that skill to an instructor before they teach it to a child. That's just not required. Even if you sit in a training like letters, you may not absorb it. You may not get it. You may have your own speech articulation issues, your own language issues. Nobody's making sure you can do the skill before you teach it. They're training you what the skill is.
Mm, that's interesting. It's interesting that teachers are not getting the training that they need and then subsequently having to do it themselves because, I guess I equate it to myself as a financial advisor. It's a certified financial planner. It's an advanced designation. About 10% of the advisor population has it because it's 2-year commitment at least. And the pass rate on the exam is about 50%. It's difficult. And that's what I'm hearing here is that teachers are not either allowed to or incentivized to be better and to get this training so that they can do that. I would think that we would have a bank of highly trained individuals that are dedicated to children specific for reading. And it seems like there are some, but there's not enough. Do you know how many there are? It's an unfair question.
I mean, part of what you're saying is right and part of it is wrong. Okay. We have a lot of individuals, and usually a couple in every school, who call themselves reading specialists, literacy interventionists, literacy coaches, all these things where
Right.
they claim through title and other things to be the specialist that you're talking about. The reality is they don't have the training in the science of reading. They have training in some other balanced literacy approach, level literacy interventions, Fonteness and Pinnell, reading recovery. All of these other programs that we know don't work. And they'll still do them because they'll say, no, no, Johnny's learning to read when I give him reading recovery. Look, he's doing more, but they're not. Reading recovery is in a first grade program. So in first grade, they're like, no, no, I'm teaching Johnny to read with reading recovery. But the studies show when Johnny gets to third grade, he's worse off for having reading recovery than if you gave him nothing.
Wow.
But they feel that what they're doing is good and that it's working. but the evidence says it's not if you look down the road. So we have people in those positions, but you can call yourself a reading interventionist and not be an effective reading teacher. That's just fact.
Wow. Okay. Kind of sounds like titling in the financial advisor field. There's lots of different titles that you can choose from. That some hold weight and some certainly don't hold weight. Um, with regard to the programs that are out there, I've always been confused as to why there's so many programs. And as a ballpark number, do you know how many programs are out there? Just ballpark.
I mean, if you're talking to interventions, I don't know, because people are making them up all the time. I mean, like,
Why?
because there's money in it. There's money in it. So if I can make, I mean, there's a program here in Missouri that is a curriculum called Pathways. Somebody in Missouri made up Pathways, and he's able to sell it to a lot of Missouri schools. So, I mean, think about the billions, literally billions of dollars spent on curriculum in the United States.
Yes.
If I can even just take a piece of that by making a shiny new curriculum, why wouldn't I? So there are all of these choices, and they're all marketed to schools now as research-based, science-based, science of reading stickers on them. I mean, it's almost a silly question. Billions and billions of dollars are available to schools to spend on whatever crap curriculum they want. So why wouldn't I want to take a piece of that money and market something to a school? Doesn't matter if it works or not. Once I sell it to you, I'm selling it to the next school too.
Got it. Got it. What else do we need to know about curriculum and research based versus evidence based?
If you have a struggling reader that is in an intervention, know what they're using, okay? And what you're going to hear 90% of the time is strategies. I have a lot of strategies that I use with them. That's when we're going back to, well, sometimes he sand writes, sometimes he writes in the air, sometimes we talk about short vowels, sometimes we talk about heart words, sight words, high frequency words, whatever they want to call them. That just means there's no scope and sequence. I mean, strategies just means they're doing what they think they should do that day. If your kid is in an intervention and they're not using any sort of program, are they at least assessing him? Do they have an assessment saying these are the skills he lacks, these are the skills he's mastered? And are they reassessing him periodically to see if he's gaining those skills? Because if they're going to make their own crap up, they're going to need to do some research. And that research is effective assessments to look for growth in those skills.
So that brings up a point with regard to the assessments. I, as a parent, have to understand that there are assessments with every program in an intervention. Are those difficult to read, or how do I understand those assessments and the success or failure of those? Is that an easy thing for someone like me to understand?
Generally, the assessments and intervention, anyone should be able to understand. So, for instance, one of the initial things, can your child recognize all the letters of the alphabet? That's pretty easy to understand. If we're marking through a bunch of letters, the kid doesn't get it. Do they understand that those letters make certain sounds? And then if you've got a structured assessment, and this may not be the perfect order, okay, but it's going to be looking, does he know the short A, the short E, the short I, so you're looking, has he mastered that skill? And then you're looking at, and these assessments should be giving him, say, 10 short A words. If he can read all 10 of them, he gets 10 out of 10. If he's reading 4 of them, we got a problem at short A. And so the assessments should be looking at each individual skill being taught and whether they have mastered it. So, yeah, we're not talking like some secret formula. We're talking, can your kid read certain types of words? And then there's also sight words, high frequency words that we expect kids they have to memorize parts. They should not be trying to memorize the entire word. They should be like the word want, okay? They should already know the sounds of the W, the N, and the T. But the A doesn't make a short A or long A sound. It makes an ah, it makes a weird wah sound. So that is not, the A apple ah. It's a different sound. So we need to teach them, okay, this word, there's an exception. And so we also need to know which of the words that they can read and which of the words they can't, and teach them those skills. But yes, an assessment should tell you where they are at in the syllable types, in the letters, etc.
All right. Thank you for joining us for episode 9, where we discussed the different types of research, evidence based, research based, and curriculum around it, some of the issues surrounding it. If you're enjoying the content, I highly suggest that you like and follow us, and please share the information that you see on these videos. Also, Lifeline to Literacy, which is powering this episode, is a nonprofit group that is specifically formed to help individuals fight for the rights of their children to read, and hopefully can provide the support and legal representation where appropriate for those individuals. It takes a great deal of money to do so. So if you take a look at Lifeline to Literacy and can donate some money, that's fantastic. We use that money to help individuals that cannot afford this fight. And I know myself, I would not be prepared to do any kind of due process or fight the system or even understand the basics in an IEP. It is an extremely difficult area, in my humble opinion, and that's why you are fighting the fight that you're doing. So we appreciate that.